Well, welcome my natural science class. We will have met by now, but I'm sort of doing this the week before classes, just to get ahead. I've got to stop looking at myself in that corner, look in the mirror, camera instead. We're going to be looking at genes and genetics and evolution in this first part of our course. And I'm going to set you a dilemma. And this is inspired by Professor Bob Williamson, who I had the great pleasure of listening to at a conference about 18 months ago. And it seemed like a really good way to talk to students about genetics, because otherwise it's going to be pretty dry. So he suggested that we could actually set real-world conundrums, dilemmas for you to try and solve. So you get to choose one in your group and then present back to us what you've discovered. During class, I'll obviously be teaching some theory behind it all, running some experiments, doing some other activities, so you've got chances to learn some of the material you need to come to grips with to explain your dilemma. But a lot of time we're going to set aside for you guys to actually collaborate via a blog site to develop a presentation in some form for the class to explain what you've come up with. So, what are these dilemmas? This is a real story from a friend of Bob Williamson's, who's a genetic ethicist. He had two dwarves visit him for counselling about their plans for having a child. And they wanted to know what was the chance of them having a child who was of normal height. They both have a condition known as Achondroplasia, which is dwarfism. I always forget his name now. The guy in Game of Thrones is an Achondroplasia dwarf. High functioning, there's nothing else wrong, it is shorter. So, if you were that genetic counsellor, what are you going to talk to your clients about? What questions have you got for them? What do you want to know? In the case of Bob Williamson's friend, those two dwarves wanted to know whether they could have bought a normal-sized child. Interesting questions. What would you do as a counsellor? What questions have you got for them? What ethical dilemmas does this raise? Because they're choosing whether or not to have a child based simply on the height of that child. Is that reasonable? There's lots of really big questions to be answered here. Alzheimer's disease is quite common. My mother and her twin sister both had Alzheimer's in their final years, which is a little bit worrying. So if I go a bit vague, you know what's going on, I'm getting old. And a simple test can in fact determine whether you're one of the 14 people in every 100 who will get Alzheimer's, genetically develop Alzheimer's. Of the other 86 people in that 100, one is potentially likely to also develop Alzheimer's, but from different causes. So, what do you do? Do you want to know now? Is age really important to whether you want to know the answer to that question? What else do you need to know before you decide whether you want the test? You're young. What's the chance of a cure? What causes Alzheimer's? There's all sorts of interesting information and interesting questions around Alzheimer's, which is becoming quite a problem for our society as we age and stay alive longer. So there's some interesting dimensions here. Angelina Jolie had both her breasts removed. When was that? 2013 now? Because a very simple test developed by a person I know personally, a friend of mine, allows people to test for the presence of this BRCA gene. Her mother had died very young, and she had not had a mother in her life because of that. She determined that she did in fact have the presence of the gene mutation that put her at great risk of breast cancer, but by no means was it certain. And she took that amazing decision for a woman in her career to have her breast removed. So who do we test? Who should have a BRCA test? What happens if the test is positive for the potential for breast cancer? What do you do? This one's probably not as compelling for you, but it's quite an interesting dilemma with lots of ethics and morals around it too. There's a company called 23andMe, and they sequence your DNA for $100. And from that, they give you a reasonably accurate indication of your ancestry. So, in fact, where you came from, genetically speaking. And people have had some interesting surprises about their genetic makeup, believing that they came from a certain part of the world and have discovered they've got genes from quite different parts of the world. For a full $1,000, it's probably less now, it's 18 months old, these figures, they'll actually sequence your entire genome. And that's a massive, interesting thing in itself. The first human genome cost over $100 million to have sequenced back in 2000. So 16 years later, $1,000. And with that $1,000, you get a report showing every single nucleotide in sequence on every one of your chromosomes, which means we can work out what mutations you possess at each of your gene loci, and therefore what chances you may have of certain diseases. Schizophrenia is well known as a genetically inherited disease, and yet in many cases it doesn't switch on. With marijuana use, it quite commonly switches on. So some interesting stuff we can find from the genome map. The insurance industry, of course, are very, very interested in this data because they can determine whether or not they want to insure you. Or if they do insure you, just how much you're going to have to pay for that insurance. If you're thinking about getting married and having children with somebody, you could actually ask to see their genome. Kills love a bit, doesn't it? Anyway, but again, you may wish to have children of a certain sort. And if your potential partner doesn't match your needs for intelligence and sporting prowess, maybe you don't want to marry them. Or at least don't have children with them. May have children with somebody else. That might go well. And the other really interesting one that is fascinating when you start to dig into it, and I'm not going to try and give too much away because I want you to find out for yourself. But there's this new, well, not that new now, this gene that was discovered that we call the warrior gene. And essentially Hans Brunner discovered when he started studying violent criminals incarcerated in prisons in Belgium, and then we went a bit more global, that there was this particular mutation, this variation, that gave people this amazing, aggressive, violent behaviour. Why would that exist in our population? Why do we want people like that? Certainly we don't want them now. Were they useful once in our evolutionary history? And of course, the big thing now is, and it's already been used successfully in an American trial, can you defend yourself in a court case saying, hey, it wasn't my fault. It's my genetic makeup. I've got the warrior gene. I'm sorry about what I did, but, it's not my fault. The case in America was interesting. The guy who used it in his appeal against his sentence, he was sentenced to death. And he appealed against his death sentence. And the judge took it into consideration and commuted his sentence to life imprisonment. And life imprisonment in the particular state means he never leaves. So he'll die in prison anyway. It'll just take a lot longer. So again, an interesting situation. Julian Savelescu, who's a colleague of Bob Williamson, now based in London, believes it is the ethical obligation of every parent to ensure that their child is the best they can be. What does that mean for dwarfism? What does that mean if you have Alzheimer's? Can I choose so my child never has Alzheimer's? What does it mean for the BRCA gene? What does that mean for the insurance industry? Keen to get genetic testing as cheap as possible. And does that mean that we can ethically remove a gene like the warrior gene? Can we ever remove a gene because we wish to? Should we ever remove a gene because we wish to? With your project, you're going to need to think through a lot of really interesting science to try and understand the manner in which genes are inherited, how a gene's expressed. I'm using language you don't understand yet, and that's quite deliberate. You have to find out for yourself. Well, I'm going to help you, obviously. But there are also really big moral and ethical questions here. And science is not divorced from the moral and ethical dimensions of our lives. When do we interfere with genetics? When should we? Should we ever? Who gets to decide? So hopefully these dilemmas intrigue you, and we can have some really good conversations and find some wonderful ways to present what you may discover. You might like to do a debate, you might like to set up a play, you might do a video. But somehow or other you're going to talk to us about one of those 5 topics. Thanks.